Welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Energy Report. Russia is right now preparing to host leaders from Iran and Qatar next month. They'll be discussing the formation of an OPEC-style cartel among natural gas producers. The meeting was originally planned for today, but it was delayed while the countries made preparations for the forum's charter. Iran says the three nations have already reached a consensus on setting up a gas version of OPEC. Russia describes them as a big troika. Other countries expected to join in these talks: Algeria, Bolivia, Indonesia, Libya, and also Venezuela. Joining us now to discuss about the possibilities of this cartel, Dr. Richard Weitz is Senior Fellow and Director for the Center of Political Military Analysis with the Hudson Institute. Dr. Weitz, good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the Institute is sponsoring a discussion tomorrow entitled Energy, New Russian Imperialism and the Next U.S. Administration. Let's talk about the U.S. role here with the vast reserves controlled by Russia right now of natural gas. Is this a U.S. issue, or is this more of an EU issue?
Well, I wouldn't make the distinction between the two, since the United States is very concerned about European security, European economics, and it's true, the United States doesn't import natural gas from Russia and doesn't plan to in the near future unless they can be able to liquefy it, but that's far in the future. But because of the fact that the EU countries obtain so much of their energy either directly from Russia, be it oil and gas, or also from Central Asia, a lot of the pipelines will flow through Russia, and that gives Russian influence over the pricing as well as potentially the ability to control the flow. It's become an issue of concern for the United States and within NATO, through our diplomacy. It's become a major issue that we're trying to encourage diversification of European energy sources because we're concerned that over time this kind of dependence on energy could redound negatively on the kind of foreign policies the Europeans feel comfortable pursuing if there's a conflict, say, between Russia and the United States.
Sure, the policy influence, right. Now, you had mentioned that LNG exports from the U.S. to Europe are a possibility. You said a ways off. What timing do you see? Because we have such vast reserves of shale gas here in the U.S. There's a tremendous potential, it seems, for the future.
Right. The Russians are, I mean, as you know, their ability to influence, to draw influence from their natural gas is less than for oil, because what they do now is they have to build the fixed pipelines, and they can't really redirect the energy as rapidly as they would like in order to play off the potential clients, get a better price, or for political influence. So what they would like to do at some point is to liquefy a lot of that share, because that will give them more control over the flow. And they're experimenting. They're trying to build one of these complexes out in the Far East, and they're thinking about building another one on the Baltic coast. But the consumers there even would be China, Japan, and the Far East, and then more Europe, perhaps Scandinavia. The U.S. really isn't seen as a direct client for this, at least as I said, in the near term. You know, I'm thinking decades out. Who knows what might happen?
Right, hard to make predictions that far out. When you talk about building pipelines, Richard, we heard word just from Gazprom earlier today about a new direct pipeline it's building to South Ossetia, Georgia, saying the old one had been damaged. It was, I believe it was in the days or weeks after the Russia-Georgian conflict. Is this also a political play as well, making this direct line to the breakaway region of South Ossetia?
It's possible. I mean, what they've been doing is as you know, they've recognized these as independent countries, whereas almost all the other countries of the world still consider them part of Georgia. They've announced they're going to keep military troops there. They're announced they're establishing military bases there. The pipeline actually, though appears to be for technical reasons. The fighting and other developments have interceded and interrupted any flow of energy from other sources. It's going to have to come from Russia, and I could see why they would want to build a pipeline for that. But taken in the context of all these policies, it's a clear Russian vision that these two territories are going to be separated from Georgia and perhaps at some point become part of Russia. There's still some debate about that within the Russian community itself.
I think you can make a very strong argument that it's Russia's recognition of those breakaway republics that matters more than any other country in the world. What about the potential for OGEC, as it's called, the natural gas cartel that is at least in the working stages right now? Russia, Iran, Qatar, are they all legitimately on board together?
No. There's a series of disagreements, and they claim they're now postponing it because of the need to do the charter.
Right, they were supposed to meet just today.
Right, and this has actually come up within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which also includes India and China, because ideally if you have this bloc of Eurasian states, they could set up this self-contained energy component. You know, Russia and Iran would supply it, and China and India would buy it, and they could basically have a lot of side deals, not have to worry about the West and so on. But there's so many conflicting interests, even between Russia and Iran. Qatar has a whole different agenda, that it would be very difficult to have them sign on. And then for the reasons we gave, natural gas is not as fungible as oil in terms of being able to redirect it, control the price, and so on. So I think any such effort will be inherently limited and be fraught with tensions, because each of them have different visions of where they want to see the relationship go. There are other factors dividing them, particularly Iran's nuclear policy, support for terrorism, and then Qatar and Iran have their own differences. So I think that whatever progress we made, it won't look like OPEC. It might be, and the Russians claim this is the case, they just want to have a little more understanding and transparency, think maybe perhaps do a little planning.
Russia is asking for greater transparency?
Right, into what's going on in Iran and so on. But of course, as you know, they refuse to sign the Energy Charter, so it's very difficult for the EU and hence the United States to understand what their plans are.
We've seen very public shows of unity between Russia and Venezuela. This is part of Hugo Chavez's foreign policy to some degree. Is the bond as strong as it seems from a PR standpoint? Are those two going to be together with whatever comes out of this series of talks?
No, and I think that the reason why not is what we've done in the United States. Venezuela it became a very personal animosity between Chavez and President Bush. Now that President Bush is leaving the equation and President Obama has come in, I think it will be difficult for Chavez to justify a very strongly anti-American policy.
We're no longer the great Satan.
Correct. Right? And the relationship with Russia, it's very much focused on energy, but more on arms. And the Russians don't put great stock into this relationship. I mean, they want to sell their arms, they want to have some energy cooperation, but for them, it's just what they do is they pick off countries that have alienated themselves from the United States. So Iran, China, because of Tiananmen, we refuse to sell them weapons, and now Venezuela, Cuba perhaps, but I wouldn't read too much into this particular relationship.
Following along those lines, Richard, some of the other countries we mentioned, the other four that could join these talks, a few have had poor relations with the U.S. in the past. Libya comes to mind, although that is quickly repairing. Bolivia also is worth mentioning just because of the recent tensions with the embassies involved here and the Venezuelan influence on Bolivia.
Right. I think that, though, the underlying thrust of the relationship is less overtly anti-U.S. than really an economic incentive to try and, the OPEC seems to have done well in some instances in raising their prices. We've got a great commodity too. We should develop it. Now, if the Obama administration is smart, they'll try and bring this into the diplomatic agenda. I mean, say we're a new president, we want to improve relations with you. We have some areas of concern. One of these areas is the your energy cooperation with Russia and perhaps the other countries involved. We would like you to consider this, and when you're considering how to restructure the relationship. And I wouldn't put too much pressure on it, but it's something that we all would want to develop as we proceed further.
Final question, Richard. As the next meeting comes upon us in late December, and Barack Obama and his administration are moving closer to taking office, what do you expect to come from that meeting, if anything? Or will there be another postponement like we saw today?
It's possible it's a postponement. I suspect they'll have some kind of meeting. They tend to agree in declarations of principles and kind of principles we'd like to see. Transparency will be in there. They'll have some claim saying this is not directed against any other country. They want to promote, a harmonious relationship. What they stress, though, is they want to have some kind of less reliance on market mechanisms, more kind of managed flows. So you want to take into some kind of consideration into the developments in terms of customers and sellers, and perhaps have a little more stability, which something, of course, the Bush administration is very uncomfortable with. The Obama administration may be a bit more comfortable with managed energy relationships. Too early to tell, but we'll see more.
Base it on economics rather than foreign policy, a novel idea. Richard Weitz is a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute, and the discussion tomorrow, energy, new Russian imperialism, and the next U.S. administration. Richard, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Very insightful discussion about the possibility of a natural gas-style OPEC cartel. Well, we're taking a look.